Hello and welcome from my little space here in Vienna. My name is Luisa, I'm a literature student and writer, and today we're going to talk about books, specifically my reading list for my master exam. I have written my master thesis about female authorship in the Viennese modernism, made a bunch of videos about that, you can check them out if you haven't yet. And now the next step is my defensio and my master exam. It is slightly terrifying, but also exciting to be so close to the final step. And I've taken you along on this whole journey. I also uploaded my submission vlog and lots of in-between vlogs. And now I can share with you some of the books that I have to read. So my master exam is going to be divided in 3 parts. The first part is my defensio, where I defend my master thesis. The second part is where my reading list comes in. I have 2 topics. One is closer to my master thesis, but not exactly within the thesis, and the second one is farther away from it, but all in the realm of Austrian literature. And then we come to the third part of my exam, which is a whole different subject out of my studies, and I'm going with sociolinguistics. My exam is at the beginning of September, and I'm now trying to read all the books. In total, it's 19 books, and as I said, it's divided in 2 kind of topics or epochs, or maybe eras, if you will. And the first one is Austrian Exile Literature during and after the Second World War. This is what I'm going to talk about today. These are 9 books. And the second topic is contemporary Austrian literature from 1990 up until today. I will do a separate video because that would just be a little bit too much for today. Okay, before we talk about the books, what is exile literature? It is already in the name. It's works written by authors who were forced to flee because of war, because of censorship, or any other political issues. During the Second World War, so many artists and writers were prosecuted and had to leave the country. And all of these works that were produced in exile, where they emigrated to a different country, are now under the term exile literature. I chose all of the books on my reading list by myself. There were only a few criteria that I had to follow. As I said, they need to be Austrian, and the book needs to be produced in exile, so not before that time. And I had another criteria that I chose for myself, which was finding as many books as possible as audiobooks, because it would make the whole process of reading everything a lot easier. The audiobooks come in handy. I'm a very slow reader, and the reading list was quite intimidating for me, so I felt like it's easier to have audiobooks that I can just listen when I'm not able to sit down and read. Let's begin with the author Hermann Broch. I personally knew the name, but I had never read anything by him. He was born in 1886 in Vienna and fled to the US, where he died in 1951 in Connecticut. 2 important figures, Thomas Mann and Albert Einstein, helped him flee the country and emigrate to the USA. 2 of his most famous books are The Sleepwalkers and The Death of Virgil, but I chose a different book which kind of fit more into all of my criterias. Die Schuldlosen, The Guiltless. It's around 350 pages, and it's divided in 11 parts, sort of, and some of them are directly connected and others are not really. But I started reading the book, and it started off in a very beautiful way, very poetic, very philosophical thoughts, and I loved the language. It was really interesting to read. I felt like, wow, this is going to be great. And then as the book progresses and gets a little bit more storyline, I started to kind of lose interest a little bit, and I have yet to find back into the story because I read a few other books in between. I'm halfway through now, so I just need to pick it up again because I think it's actually quite interesting. It talks about how moral decay is kind of unknowingly paving the way for National Socialism and for the Nazi regime during the time. So it's actually quite interesting, and I really love the beginning, but I have to get back into it, and then I might give you another summary where I can tell you how I loved the whole book. The second book is a favorite of mine by Stefan Zweig, Die Schachnovelle, Chess Story, or The Royal Game. I found 2 different translations, but there is definitely an English version of this book. It's quite famous. Stefan Zweig is one of my favorite authors. I think he's really interesting. He was born in 1881 in Vienna and died in 1942 in Brazil, where he and his wife committed suicide. In his last letter, he writes, Ehe ich aus freiem Willen und mit klaren Sinnen aus dem Leben scheide, drängt es mich, eine letzte Pflicht zu erfüllen. Diesem wundervollen Lande Brasilien innig zu danken, das mir und meiner Arbeit so gute und gastliche Rast gegeben. Mit jedem Tage habe ich dies Land mehr lieben gelernt und nirgends hätte ich mir mein Leben lieber vom Grunde aus neu aufgebaut, nachdem die Welt meiner eigenen Sprache für mich untergegangen ist und meine geistige Heimat Europa sich selber vernichtet. Aber nach dem 60. Jahre bedürfte es besonderer Kräfte, um noch einmal völlig neu zu beginnen. Und die meinen sind durch die langen Jahre heimatlosen Wanderns erschöpft. So halte ich es für besser, rechtzeitig und in aufrechter Haltung ein Leben abzuschließen, dem geistige Arbeit immer die lauterste Freude und persönliche Freiheit das höchste Gut dieser Erde gewesen. Ich grüße alle meine Freunde, mögen sie die Morgenröte noch sehen nach der langen Nacht. Ich, allzu ungeduldiger, gehe ihnen voraus. Stefan Zweig, Petropolis, 22nd, 1942. This is quite touching, and it also reflects all of the difficult emotions that he must have gone through after fleeing the country and emigrating into a new one, and getting a lot of information from what was going on in Europe, and feeling that he was on the one hand not able to do anything. There is also the term of survivor's guilt, that he survived and he's now in a different country while he knows what is going on in Europe. The chess story also refers to the cruelty that is happening in Europe, and it is a very compelling and intriguing story. It is set on a ship from New York to Buenos Aires, and there is a very famous world champion chess player on the ship, and he starts to play a game with some of the people on the ship, and it turns out they're not very good. But then there is this stranger coming by and telling them, oh, you have to do this and that to at least play to remis, if that's the English term, remis, I don't know. And then we get to know the story and the past of this stranger. He was a banker and had lots of information where families and officials put their money, so the Gestapo imprisoned him and tried to get information from him. And then the story goes from there. I'm not going to give away too much, but it's absolutely brilliant. I love Stefan Zweig's way of storytelling. I think his language is poetical and beautiful with metaphors and everything, but it is not too difficult. So I think it's just a very nice and easy read, but still with an extremely beautiful language. That's how I perceive it. The third book is also by Stefan Zweig, Die Welt von Gestern, The World of Yesterday, a memoir of a European. And it's exactly that. It's his memories of the past, of how life was like in Europe when he grew up. And it's very personal. It has many anecdotes in there. I'm not finished yet, but everything I've read so far is very beautiful. He also wrote a few biographies, for example, on Marie Antoinette, and the beautiful thing about these works is that language also plays a big role, and it's not just a side effect, because when you read a memoir or a biography, it's often by people who are not very literary or not very poetical. But in Stefan Zweig's case, it is really beautiful to read. So yeah, that's a big joy. He wrote this memoir shortly before he died, and it was published afterwards. I wrote down, he portrays Vienna and other cities in Europe as they were before the war, the art and literature scene, the pulsing life. He also glorifies it a little bit, the past, and he paints a picture of the downfall and everything that was lost. So it's also quite melancholic and a little bit sad to read this, especially from his perspective, knowing that he committed suicide after writing this memoir. You already get the idea that most of these topics are quite heavy, which makes sense if you think of all of the things that these authors experienced. And this is also the case with the next author. Her name is Maria Lazar. She was mostly forgotten, and now there are a few books that they are reprinting again, which is a common case with female authors, which is also the reason why I tried to get in a lot of female authors in my list as well. Maria Lazar was born in 1895 in Vienna and died in Stockholm in Sweden, where she emigrated in 1948. The book I chose is called Zwei Soldaten, Two Soldiers, and I couldn't find an English translation. However, another book by her, which is called Viermal Ich, Myself Four Times, it is translated into English if you want to check out something by this author. And this book is set in the 1920s. It follows four female friends and is a feminist story. And the other book, Two Soldiers, is, as the title already says, about two soldiers, but from two different countries. One is a British soldier and the other one is a German soldier, and they are both deadly wounded on the battlefield, circling each other. Each of them has an inner monologue and they revisit memories and think of their families. It reveals the brutal fact that there is no reconciliation in war, and the book is quite intense, but I have yet to finish it. Another book that I'm not yet finished, but the next one I have finished, and it is Lisa's Zimmer by Hilde Spiel, in English, The Darkened Room. And Hilde Spiel was not only an author but also a journalist. She was born in 1911 in Vienna and died in 1990 in London. Right after the war in 1946, she went to Vienna and wrote a report on what life is like there. And then she went back to the UK, but eventually in the 1960s, she moved back to Austria and she worked there for the newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. This book is the story of an immigrant in New York. It is a very slow story, but this fits the topic very well because the character is gathering a lot of other immigrants around her, but she herself is slowly decaying, lost in her memories of a life that is past and that she's never able to get back from Europe. And she is also an addict, and there are many people around her who are trying to help her, but it's not possible. And the perspective is from her maid, kind of watching her not being able to heal. So at first it was a slow start and I was really like, am I interested in the characters? Is it like, does it give enough input? But as it progressed, I was intrigued and I wanted to know what the destinies were of these characters. I mean, the writing style is not the most interesting. It's totally okay and it really kept me going, so it's good, but it's nothing too special. But I think I would like to read more of this author because I did really enjoy this book. Number 5 is Inferno by Mela Hartwig. She's also a mostly forgotten author, but they are now revisiting her work and republishing many of her books. She was born in 1893 in Vienna and then emigrated to London, where she died in 1967. She was apparently also an actress, and when she lived in London, she also worked as a translator and had contact to Virginia Woolf. The book Inferno is unfortunately not yet translated, but a different book is, and it is called Bin ich ein überflüssiger Mensch? And the English title is Am I a Redundant Human Being? So if you want to check out a book by this author, you might want to go for the other one if you only read in English. I'm going to read you the blurb by the publisher Droschel. Vienna 1938. The Anschluss of Austria is imminent. It is a time of pogroms, of opportunists, of denunciations and enthusiastic Nazis. In these times of upheaval, 18-year-old Ursula has to decide which road to follow. Will she be part of the brutal regime or join the resistance? Nowhere can she be safe anymore, for soon all walls will have ears and behind every door someone will eavesdrop. This novel's breathless prose disconcertingly mirrors Ursula's inner turmoil, her despair and her existential fears. So from everything I've heard, I think this is going to be a really interesting read, also with the very heavy topics of the Second World War. I think there is no book in this list that doesn't touch on it. As well as the next book by Hermynia zur Mühlen, which is a pretty cool name. The book is called Als der Fremde kam. What's the English title? Came the Stranger, which was translated by herself back then. So I'm not entirely sure how easy it is to find an English copy, but maybe you can find one in a second-hand store or somewhere. The author was born in 1883 in Vienna and then emigrated to the UK, where she died in 1951 in a small town outside of London. She initially studied to become a primary teacher, but then she worked as a writer and as a translator. And her immigration path is not as straightforward because she was born in Austria, but then she lived in Germany. She fled to Austria first and then to Bratislava as the Nazis came that way, and then in the end she went to the UK. By the end of her life she was quite sick and poor. Unfortunately, her estate, if that's the right term, so everything that she possessed, is lost, so we can't really work with any of her writings, any of her, I don't know, diaries, letters, memoirs. That's pretty sad. And her work is also widely forgotten. The book, which I'm almost finished, I only have a few more pages to read, is also similar to the book by Mela Hartwig, Inferno, touching on the subjects of, you know, what direction are you taking as an individual and who are you following? The story is set in a small Czechoslovakian town during the Second World War, and it follows the events as the Nazis come closer and closer. And in this area there are so many different cultures, and it is portrayed in the different characters, and it shows how fear and hatred spread and how the situation just becomes more and more dreadful. And as I said, how each of these characters handles it. At first I was extremely overwhelmed because there are so many different people, and I was also a little bit bored. I was like, who are they? What's going on? So it took me quite a long time to fall into the story, but then when I was in there, I really was interested in following these characters and in reading it. It's also very heartbreaking. It feels very real to read it, and it is also an important perspective because it's not from Germany or Austria, but from one of the other occupied countries, and it was part of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, which also includes a lot of issues and problems from that time that are still relevant. Two more books. The next one is by Franz Werfel, Der veruntreute Himmel, Embezzled Heaven. Franz Werfel was born in 1890 in Prague, and then he died in Beverly Hills in the US in 1945. The book I chose is definitely not one of his famous ones. I think his most popular ones are Verdi, Roman der Oper, and Die 40 Tage des Musadag. The last one was quite interesting for me, but it is extremely long, so I felt like, I'm not doing this to myself. Embezzled Heaven is probably the book that I liked the least, mostly because of the story, because I think the writing style is pretty good, and also the reason what kept me going. I didn't write down much, only that the story tells the life of Teta Linek. She's a simple maid, and she is deeply religious and searches for a priest who will kind of secure her a place in heaven, and she really wants to do everything right, and this is her story. The plot itself was a little bit boring for myself, but I think it's one of those books that when you dive a little deeper and when you start analyzing it, that it kind of has this philosophical layer, and it is quite interesting nonetheless. And I think the writing style was beautifully made, that it just kept going. So yeah, it was okay. I mean, it's just another book in my reading list. Then we have the last book in my list, Die Kapuzinergruft by Joseph Roth, in English, The Emperor's Tomb. Joseph Roth was born in 1894 in Ostgalizien in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. He died in 1939 in Paris. After World War I, where he had to serve, he was working as a journalist for the Frankfurter Zeitung, where he traveled across Europe. But before the Second World War, where he was already realizing what the situation was going to be like, he wrote a letter to Stefan Zweig, where he said, Inzwischen wird es Ihnen klar sein, dass wir großen Katastrophen zutreiben. Abgesehen von den privaten, unsere literarische und materielle Existenz ist ja vernichtet, führt das Ganze zum neuen Krieg. Ich gebe keinen Heller mehr für unser Leben. Es ist gelungen, die Barbarei regieren zu lassen. Machen Sie sich keine Illusionen. Die Hölle regiert. And in his novel, he goes back in time. So the story is not set in the Second World War, but in the First World War, telling the story of a man who is becoming a soldier and what he experiences, about his connections with his friends and the time that he is in imprisonment by the Russians. And it shows a portrait of the fall of the Count K monarchy and really just the foreplay of the Second World War, more or less. And here it also says that the title, Die Kapuzinergruft, is the burial place of the Austrian emperors, and it becomes a symbol of the bygone Danube monarchy. The story ends in 1938 with the Anschluss of Austria to the Deutsches Reich, which is a pretty strong ending. We don't get to know what happens to the character afterwards, but we can imagine. And I think this is the thing with stories that are set in the First World War, that you always know what's coming afterwards. I initially wanted to read a different book by Josef Roth, Das Spinnennetz, but this didn't fit into my criteria, so I had to go with a different one. In school, I had to read another book by Josef Roth, which was called Hiob, and I really didn't like it, back then at least. With this book now, I felt like it's okay. It didn't catch me that much, but it was definitely... It was okay, I guess. Yeah, maybe I'm not the biggest Josef Roth fan, but I might check out the other book that I mentioned, Das Spinnennetz, and the plot just sounded a lot more interesting for me personally, so this might be a project for after my master exam. Okay, those were a lot of books, many that I would absolutely recommend and a few that I just read for university purposes, which is fine too. I'm really excited to do part 2 with contemporary books from 1990 up until today. I will share that in a little bit of time. And now it is time to finish my tea. I would love to hear what you are currently reading and if you knew any of these authors maybe, and if you've read any of them before. And I will see you in my next video. Goodbye. And the chess story is also referring. It is set on a ship from New York to Bueno, as well as the next book. Oh, it's starting to rain. Can you hear the rain? Oh, I think our windows are open.